I guess, big thoughts on my mind that I need to share. So I'm going to do that. And I'm incognito. Hopefully nobody notices that I'm live. I could just do these private, but whatever. Anyway, I mentioned in a short that's posting right now that you won't have watched if you catch this live what we're supposed to be doing with our lives. Why things are the way they are. Things are cyclical. Things are cyclical because humans have finite lives. Humans have finite lives. And we introduce new human lives cyclically. At any given time, there is a certain percentage of people who were all born in the same year. And those people, regardless of when or whether they push out offspring, will age at the same rate. All of those people, and then you put those people into age groups because they experience roughly the same life events. And what sociology has noticed is about every 15 years, for all of human history, about every 15 years, things change. Just enough that you can say that things are changing and that every 15 years, children are different. The people born in 15-year brackets are different from one another because of the events of those 15 years. And a Chinese historian actually sat down and blocked it out. And what he figured out is that history actually cycles over every 50 years, that events cycle over every 50 years. And what that means is that every two generations and 20%, every two generations and 20% have to deal with the two generations and 20% previous kicking a certain can down the road. About every 50 years, cans become piled up in the road and we have to deal with them effectively. That's what happens. When that 50 years starts is impossible to track because you can't track it at the moment that the American continent was for the United States. You can't track it at the moment the American continent. This is why history is a science, and this is why it's taken so seriously by very intelligent people who are less insane than I am. You can't track it. This is why people do this. They're trying to answer the question of when does the 50 years begin? This is why sociologists track our generation so closely. When does the 50 years begin? When is year zero? Because if we can track year zero, then we can plot out the 50 years and we can figure out what fucking cans are going to come due when. And we can deal with what's coming now. So it's not coming. So we can get out of the cycle. This is why his history exists. This is why historians work in such close tandem with politicians. They're trying to figure out the same problem, and they're trying to do the same thing because government is about sustainability, and I have 9% battery and it is ticking down fast. Trying to do the same thing. Religion is trying to do the same thing. Politics is a subcategory, it's a sub-branch of religion, and history is a sub-branch of philosophy, which is a religion. Philosophy needs to be treated with the respect that religion is treated with. You wouldn't say the things about Christianity, Judaism, Islam that people say about philosophy and call yourself a member of those schools. And so anyway, you can't track the 50. You can't start the 50 years. You can't start it at the moment the American continent was first settled. You can't track it to Roanoke, for example, because Roanoke was a reaction to the cans that were appearing in the road in England and France, Spain, Germany, and across the European continent as it understood itself for centuries leading up to that moment. The Protestant and Yeoman reformations of Europe threw that entire worldview into utter chaos for centuries. This is why we talk today about how the lives of those people, particularly their peasants, were kind of miserable. because that's what those cultures remember about those times. You talk to a German, and what they remember about the Protestant Reformation is the Habsburgs, and being publicly and exemplarily, that's really hard, executed for petty crimes because they had foreign rulership, um, foreign dominating rulership. You ask a Polish or a Slavic person what their culture remembers of the Middle Ages, and what they remember as being slaves. The word slave comes from the Viking Slav trade. They would raid Slav villages and sell them to English speaking people. Here's your Slav. So I'm getting to what you're supposed to be doing with your life. This is why we track the generations. My legs itch like a motherfucker. You can't understand what it's like to not take a shower for more than a calendar year. Oh, man. Exfoliating is a fucking nightmare. Just an itchy, fucking horrible shit show of a nightmare. But anyway, all of that is to say that historians and the religious no longer have a voice. They no longer get listened to. There are no longer people giving them their ears as regards what they're supposed to be doing. I watch a lot of millennial historians because I don't want to be doing what I'm doing. I don't want to be doing this. This is stupid. Looking to me for this information is what a stupid person would do. I love you, Eric, but looking to me to get this information is what a stupid person would do. I have this information because I went directly to the experts. And so anyway, I spent a lot of time on here hoping that some millennial will emerge as a good communicator. And what it turns out is that the millennials who are good communicators, or at least the millennials who have enormous audiences doing what I'm doing, are utterly abhorrent, abysmal communicators and very stupid. You can tell that they have a very limited grasp of the material that they're talking about. But what they're trying to do is, and what they're succeeding at, in fact, is humanizing themselves. What they're doing is humanizing themselves by admitting over and over and over and over and over in their videos that they do not know their material as well as they should. They do not know their material as well as they should. That's why they're on YouTube. And that's why they're crowdsourcing. That's why they have to go to their comments and answer questions. That's why they have to crowdsource their conversation. That's why they have to, not their conversation, but they're also their content. They have to crowdsource their content because they don't know their material as well as they should. They don't know their material, and they don't have a plan. They're not prepared, and they don't have a plan. They're just thinking, oh well, if I share my personality and my similar lack of understanding before I came to the information that I have. And that's the other thing, is so many of these people, I'm thinking of one in particular, but so many of these people came to their expertise, their subject, not mastery, but certainly their education, through Mythbusters. And so much of what people consider public education, infotainment. So much of infotainment on YouTube. I watch the Greens, Hank, and whatever the other one's name is. Uh, they're so terrible. They're so terrible, and they're so stupid. They're so dumb. They're so dumb, and they're so relatively uneducated and so relatively and broadly ignorant of everything. But they have huge audiences, and those huge audiences don't know the difference. They don't know the difference in somebody who's broadly ignorant and somebody who specializes in a particular thing. One of them specializes in a particular thing. They actually both specialize in particular things. But the one specializes in the particular thing, tuberculosis. He knows a shitload about tuberculosis. And then he knows about other things, because when you're learning about one specific thing, you learn about a lot of other bullshit that has nothing to do with it. For example, I wanted to understand how the medieval economy worked between the years 900 and 1200, because I wanted to understand that very specific period. And now what I know is a lot about every other time period in history, because in order to contextualize something that fucking specific, you have to know everything. You have to know everything there is to know about everything else in order to know something that specifically contextual. For example, I'm still talking about what you're supposed to be doing once you turn 20. What you're supposed to be aiming yourself at, and whom you're supposed to be competing with, and why. For example, I used to watch that show, Time Team from the BBC, I think, where they go and they do archaeological digs in a 2 or 3 day span. They dig a lot of trenches. Okay, one specific episode that lives in my mind is people, just people in the UK who happen to watch that show a lot, regularly, religiously, for a decade. Let's say a decade. I don't remember when the episode was, but when I was watching the show, it had been on the air for like three decades, for a very long time. This is all from memory. I haven't looked up the show. I've talked about it briefly with Gemini AI. Anyway, they found a thing in their backyard. Just happened to find a thing, because God is funny like that. But they wouldn't have known they found a thing if they hadn't continued to educate themselves with this infotainment. So the infotainment is necessary and good for this story. Because of how much they paid attention, they kind of knew how to preserve the artifact. But they also knew enough to know that they didn't know what the fuck they were doing if they were going to treat that artifact they found digging in their backyard with the respect and dignity that it deserved from an archaeological dig. They knew this from watching and observing the professionals. The professionals are professionals because they have found a way to take their knowledge and their expertise paid to do it. That's the only reason they are professionals. Okay? That doesn't mean they're not good at what they do, but when you see a roto-rooter, you have to think back to when roto-rooter began for this example to make sense. One day, there was a guy who was like, man, these toilets are all getting clogged, and the people whose job it is to fix it, or at least the job of fixing it, that could just be dads, fucking hate doing it, and they're not good at it, and they're causing a lot of problems in the house. I am real good at this, so I'm going to do it. I'm going to develop a method and a whole system and all of this, and it's going to be proprietary to me, and I am going to unclog toilets, or whatever the fuck Roto-Rooter does. And then I'm going to get so good at it that I'm going to start to teach people how to do it. And then they're going to do it. And then that can be their job. Doesn't have to be their identity, but it can be something that they're good at. And it can be a skill that I can give to the world, to people who are inclined to take the knowledge that I have. Similar with McDonald's. Yeah, you're Roy McDonald, whatever the fuck his name was. I think he actually was a Roy. I remembered learning about this from 5th grade EOG's end of grade test. I had to read a whole essay about the founding of McDonald's for an end of grade essay, an end of grade test in North Carolina. But they teach you this when you go there. If you listen, you pay attention to your onboarding when you get hired by any of these major corporations, they'll teach you about why they were founded and why they exist in the first place. And Roy McDonald figured out that if you fucking do the Ford assembly line for burgers, you can push out a fuckload of burgers in a day, and people will come and they'll get it and they'll fucking leave and they'll have a good experience, and it won't be what happens when I go to Pizza Cottage and I am literally just there to eat my burger and fucking leave, and I'm stuck there for an hour because the server can't take the hint that my fucking plate has been empty for 45 minutes. I want to go now. Just because I'm sat down in a booth doesn't mean that I want to be here all fucking year. That's what McDonald's are for. And that guy figured that thing out. And then he taught generation after generation after generation after generation of people not just how to flip burgers. Not just how to flip burgers. If you work at a McDonald's for 2 years, you can run a McDonald's. The reason your general manager is bad at her job is because the only skill you need 2 skills to be a good general manager. You need good people skills, and you need to be able to do math. If you're not good at those things, you do not deserve that job, because you were taught both of those things between kindergarten and 3rd grade. That's the entire point of kindergarten to 3rd grade, is to teach you basic math and basic communication skills. I sit in Taco Bell, I sit in Panera, and I watch the general managers. The general manager last night came in off the clock, waiting on somebody that she was going to take home when the store closed at 1. She came in at 9. That's 4 hours off the clock. And you know what she did the whole time? Bitch about how corporate is fucking up her paycheck and she's half out the door anyway and she's already looking for other work. To her crew. And so I was talking about the reason that inflation happens is a lack of faith. Do you know why that store's mops stink? She walks in and she goes, man, this store stinks. Why does the store stink so bad? And one of the kids in the kitchen goes, yeah, the office straight smells like shit. And she's like, why does the store stink so bad? And one of the girls who works there, the only one with her fucking head on her shoulders, the only one who knows well enough to keep her fucking mouth shut around these other idiots and just do her job. She goes, yeah, the mop heads have been mildewed for days. We have needed new mop heads for days. And she goes, we got new mop heads today. And the girl goes, oh, well, they're evidently not somewhere where anybody knows that. Or when first shift got them, they didn't immediately replace them like they're supposed to. And if first shift isn't getting anything done to that degree that you've got fucking mildewed mop heads, first of all, that means your general manager isn't going around and making sure that the mops are standing up on end the way they're supposed to be. She's not doing the basics. And that means that she shouldn't have had a crew job. She shouldn't have had a shift lead job, let alone a general manager job. But we're getting to where you're supposed to be at certain age groups. When you're a corporation, you can't hire somebody right out of high school to general manage a store. Why? I know this. I worked for a kid who was 19 and general manager of a Raising Cane's, the Raising Cane's on Polaris Avenue, or whatever that is, and in Polaris in Columbus by the Polaris Mall. The biggest, jumpinest, fastest, highest revenue store in the Columbus metropolitan area, and they were the first. The Columbus metropolitan area was the first franchise Raising Cane's. All of the other Raising Cane's before the Columbus, Ohio stores opened were only in Louisiana. The Ohio franchise also owns the California franchise. And their busiest store was general managed by a 19-year-old. Why? Because he had basic communication skills and basic math skills. But you know what he didn't have? The life experience necessary to lead a team of people who were older than 19. The life experience to know that you really don't need to make it obvious that you're diddling a bunch of the girls on your crew, including the managers that you hired right out of high school, into management positions. He tried to fire me because I told one of the girls that I was working with that he was taking this other girl that he said he was training, and he was taking her out and fucking her, and that's all they were doing, was going out and fucking. And he goes, how many people did you tell that? And I said, her? And she's like, well, she's telling everybody. And I said, well, if it weren't true, you wouldn't care. And he goes, well, you got it. You can't be in this store anymore. You see too much. I was only 32 at the time. 6 more years, you think I see less? You think I interpret less accurately? No. 6% battery, and I'm almost done with this. Life comes in cycles because humans develop in cycles. We die in cycles. Until very recently, the 1990s, because of longevity science, until before the 1990s, most humans died by 35. For example, there's a channel on here that makes fun of the Japanese language. He's a Japanese, an American-born Japanese who speaks none of the language and has a friend who speaks the language. I think he's Japanese-born Japanese, and so he makes fun of the language by having them tell him obscure words in Japanese. And so wisdom teeth aren't called wisdom teeth. I don't know why he thought they would be called wisdom teeth. Wisdom teeth is an idiomatic expression in English. They would not be called wisdom teeth everywhere. Anyway, the idiomatic expression for them is basically the parents don't know. The parents don't know these teeth. And he's like, what is that supposed to mean? And the Japanese girl is explaining that, well, your parents probably died before your wisdom teeth were fully grown into your mouth when that expression was developed. Young humans, didn't use to compete with old humans in any market before the 1960s. Before the conclusion, the full conclusion of World War II, and World War II did not actually conclude with the dropping of the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. World War II didn't conclude until the Cold War was officially a Cold War. World War II was still being fought when Eisenhower stepped down. If World War II weren't still being fought when Eisenhower stepped down, we wouldn't have an interstate system. The Cold War was an extension of and an expression of the Second World War. But just while we're here, anybody who's listening, the notion that our lives are affected by the First World War and what the Second World War was actually fought over, Lebensraum, that's nonsense. Germany has no effect on your life. The German economy is backed by the U.S. dollar and the U.S. government and the U.S. military. Germany's not allowed to defend herself in case of a foreign conflict. NATO effectively exists to make sure that Germany doesn't need a defensive military. Japan only recently was allowed to start to develop her own military because Japan not being a buffer state to China's expansion and expansionist militarism, there we go. If Japan weren't able to act as a buffer state, then World War III would have already happened, because the U.S. just simply does not have enough bodies anymore who are willing to die for it. So I've talked about the faith. The reason inflation happens is because the faith in the currency is lacking either by the buyer or the seller. And governments collapse when their constituents, when the people that they're responsible for protecting and providing for, lack faith that they can do either of those things. Yep. Until the 1990s and the collapse of the Berlin Wall, which effectively ended World War II's effect on your life, you will notice that after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the wars that the United States were in were with Russia via brown people, not with Germany via Poles. And Slavs. Anyway, in the 1960s, the American people lost faith in their government because they thought World War II was over. World War II was over, sort of. World War II was over, but Russia had the H-bomb. Russia had nuclear weapons, whether it was the H-bomb or whatever bomb. Whenever the hydrogen bomb was developed is irrelevant for the point of this story. In the 1970s, by the 1970s, definitely by 1985, I was born in 1987, definitely by 1985, between Korea and 1985, the American people lost faith in their government. There is no argument that the American people have a majority faith in their government. As many as I would say, the average estimate is 65% of Americans do not have any faith in their government to defend them in case of a foreign invasion or a real war on foreign or on our home territory soil. I would say as many as 85% of people are intelligent enough to have no faith that our government is actually protecting us from foreign attacks from places like Korea, the Middle East, uh, cluster bombs from Africa, pirates in Africa, and Russia and China. I think that I don't believe in my heart that more than 35% of American people believe that Donald Trump and Joe Biden did not put American lives at risk from hostile Russian and Chinese interests. And my phone's about to die. The reason you don't know what you're supposed to be doing with your life is because you live too fucking long and you don't understand anything about human history. You're supposed to be retired at 30. Get the fuck out of the way so the kids can innovate and the kids can make shit. Old people are in the way. That's why I'm in this tent. But you still got to compete with me because I'm a fuckload better than these kids, even my own contemporaries.